In July 1943, on the vast rolling plains around the salient of Kursk, the Second World War reached one of its most fateful thresholds. In our history, the German offensive known as Operation Citadel collapsed beneath the weight of Soviet preparation. And from that moment onward, the Wehrmacht would never again regain the strategic initiative in the East. Yet history is not an inevitability carved in stone. It is a tapestry of decisions, assumptions, and fragile calculations. In this alternate reckoning, the battle unfolds differently. Germany does not hurl itself recklessly against layered Soviet defenses in a race against time. Instead, it chooses patience over pride, depth over daring, and through that decision alters the tempo of the war for another year. By the summer of 1943, the German army in the east was no longer the confident force that had surged toward Moscow and the Volga. The catastrophe at Stalingrad had shattered an entire field army and exposed the limits of Hitler's strategic inflexibility. Yet the Wehrmacht remained formidable. Its armored formations, reconstituted and reinforced with new Panthers, Tigers, and Ferdinand tank destroyers, represented a concentration of mechanical power unmatched in Europe. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, had absorbed unimaginable punishment but emerged stronger. Its industry relocated beyond the Urals. Its armies hardened by experience. Its commanders increasingly adept at operational maneuver. The Kursk salient bulged westward into German lines like a giant anvil awaiting a hammer blow. In reality, the Germans chose to strike its shoulders in a classic pincer movement, hoping to encircle and destroy vast Soviet forces. But in this alternate course, German intelligence assessments are interpreted differently. Aerial reconnaissance, signals intercepts, and reports from frontline units suggest that the Red Army has constructed defensive belts of unprecedented density. Minefields stretch for miles. Anti-tank guns lie concealed in depth. Reserve armies wait behind the front, prepared to counterattack once the German spearheads are blunted. Rather than dismiss these warnings, the German High Command heeds them. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, long an advocate of elastic defense and operational maneuver, argues that the true opportunity lies not in assaulting prepared positions but in compelling the Soviets to expend their strength against a layered German defense. He proposes a deliberate withdrawal from exposed forward lines around the salient, shortening the front and constructing successive defensive belts anchored on natural terrain. Mobile armored reserves would be held back, not committed to a frontal assault, but poised to counterattack when Soviet formations, confident in their superiority, surge forward. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler hesitates. He craves a decisive offensive victory to restore prestige after Stalingrad. Yet he is also wary of further disaster. The delay that historically plagued Operation Citadel becomes, in this scenario, an opportunity for rethinking rather than merely rearming. Reluctantly, Hitler approves a modified strategy. Instead of initiating a massive offensive in early July, the Germans will feign preparations, draw Soviet attention, and prepare to receive the blow. The Red Army, aware of German intentions but uncertain of their precise form, does not abandon its own plans. Soviet commanders, including Zhukov and Vasilevsky, had anticipated a German attack. Now, faced with apparent German caution and local withdrawals, they reassess. The Stavka concludes that the moment is ripe to seize the initiative outright. If the Germans will not attack, the Red Army will. In late July, Soviet forces begin probing offensives along the northern and southern shoulders of the salient. What follows is not the desperate German assault of our history, but a titanic defensive battle conceived with meticulous preparation. German engineers have sown their own extensive minefields, carefully mapped and integrated into defensive fire plans. Anti-tank guns are placed in concealed positions with overlapping fields of fire. Infantry divisions, though understrength, are dug into fortified zones linked by communication trenches and supported by pre-registered artillery. Behind them, panzer divisions wait in concealed assembly areas. Engines silent, commanders briefed for rapid counterstroke. When Soviet armored armies advance, they do so with immense power. Waves of T-34s and supporting infantry roll forward beneath dense artillery barrages. The earth trembles as thousands of guns unleash preparatory fire. Yet the German front does not shatter. It bends. Forward positions are sometimes abandoned deliberately, drawing Soviet units deeper into carefully planned killing zones. Communications, improved since earlier disasters, allow flexible response. Local commanders exercise initiative, conducting fighting withdrawals where necessary, preserving combat strength rather than clinging to every meter of ground. The crucial difference lies in timing. Instead of committing their new Panther and Tiger tanks piecemeal into fortified Soviet belts, the Germans unleash them against advancing Soviet spearheads that have outrun their artillery support and supply lines. Counterattacks are not grandiose charges but concentrated blows against exposed flanks. In the south, near Prokhorovka, the great clash of armor still occurs, but under altered circumstances. Rather than a chaotic meeting engagement born of mutual offensive zeal, it becomes a calculated German riposte against a Soviet thrust extended beyond its protective umbrella. The battlefield becomes a furnace of steel and dust. Soviet Tank Corps, advancing with courage and determination, encounter unexpected belts of resistance. German anti-tank screens, integrated with mobile reserves, exact a severe toll. Panthers, deployed in cohesive formations and supported by experienced crews, exploit their long-range firepower. The Tigers, used sparingly and in coordination with infantry and artillery, anchor counterattacks that slice into Soviet penetrations. Losses on both sides are grievous. Yet the Red Army's momentum falters. Air power plays its part. The Luftwaffe, husbanded carefully rather than squandered in continuous offensive sorties, concentrates its efforts over critical sectors. Though no longer dominant as in 1941, German pilots achieved temporary local superiority, disrupting Soviet supply columns and harassing armored concentrations. The VVS responds in force, and the skies over Kursk become crowded with dogfights and ground attack missions. But the German objective is not annihilation of Soviet air power, it is disruption at decisive moments. As days turn into weeks, the Soviet offensives grind forward but at mounting cost. Each apparent breakthrough encounters another defensive layer. German counterattacks seal off penetrations before they can widen. Crucially, the Wehrmacht avoids encirclement and preserves its armored core. The Red Army, expecting a collapsing enemy, instead faces a resilient, adaptive defense that absorbs punishment and retaliates with precision. By late August, the strategic picture has shifted subtly but significantly. Soviet commanders, confronted with higher than anticipated losses and limited territorial gains, paused to regroup. The anticipated cascading collapse of German lines does not materialize. Instead, the front stabilizes along shortened, more defensible positions. German armored divisions, though battered, remain coherent fighting formations. The psychological impact is profound. For the first time since Stalingrad, the Wehrmacht has withstood a major Soviet offensive and denied it operational breakthrough. This outcome does not reverse Germany's underlying disadvantages. Soviet industry continues to outproduce the Reich. Allied bombing intensifies over German cities and factories. In the Mediterranean, the Western Allies land in Italy, opening another front. Yet on the Eastern Front, the tempo changes. The Red Army cannot immediately launch the sweeping autumn offensives that, in our history, liberated vast territories. Instead, it must rebuild depleted tank armies and reconstitute shattered formations. For Germany, the respite is invaluable. A year of continued initiative does not mean constant offensive action, rather, it means the capacity to choose when and where to strike. Through the autumn and winter of 1943, Manstein orchestrates a series of limited counter-offensives aimed at straightening the line and inflicting local defeats. These operations are not grand strategic gambles but disciplined maneuvers designed to trade space for time while imposing disproportionate losses. The political ramifications ripple outward. In occupied Europe, the perception of German resilience tempers resistance movements that had drawn hope from Soviet advances. In Romania and Hungary, leaders reconsider the timing of any potential defection from the Axis cause. The specter of a resurgent German army, still capable of punishing counterblows, complicates Allied diplomacy. In London and Washington, Planners reassess their expectations of a rapid Soviet drive into Eastern Europe. Within the Soviet Union, the leadership confronts uncomfortable questions. The Red Army remains vast and determined. But the aura of inevitable forward momentum has been checked. Stalin demands explanations for stalled advances and heavy casualties. Commanders who had anticipated swift victory now emphasize caution. Operational planning becomes more deliberate. Supply accumulations more extensive. Artillery preparation even more massive. The war in the East shifts toward a grim contest of attrition. Prolonged and methodical. By the spring of 1944, Germany still holds much of Ukraine and Belarus. The Red Army prepares for renewed offensives. But these require time. German forces, though stretched thin, occupy defensive lines chosen for tactical advantage. The extra year of initiative allows the Wehrmacht to strengthen positions along the Dnieper and in the Baltic region. Complicating Soviet operational design. Army Group Center, instead of facing sudden and catastrophic encirclement in the summer of 1944, confronts a more gradual and contested Soviet buildup. Yet the broader strategic balance continues to tilt. In the West, the Allies prepare for a cross-channel invasion. The delay in Soviet breakthroughs influences Allied timing but does not eliminate their determination. When the landings in France eventually occur, Germany faces the two-front war it had long dreaded. The difference lies in the condition of its eastern armies. They are bloodied but intact, experienced in defense, and less shattered than in our timeline. Reinforcements can be shifted with marginally greater flexibility, though always at grave risk. The prolongation of German initiative by a year reshapes the map of post-war Europe. As Soviet offensives resume with overwhelming force in late 1944 and early 1945, they encounter stiffer resistance along prepared lines. Advances are slower, casualties higher. The Red Army still drives westward, but the line at which it meets Anglo-American forces shifts subtly eastward compared to our history. Cities that once fell swiftly now endure prolonged sieges or are bypassed entirely. Political arrangements in Eastern Europe become more contested, their outcomes less predetermined. Ultimately, Germany cannot escape the arithmetic of total war. Its industrial base erodes under relentless bombing. Oil shortages strangle mobility. Manpower dwindles as younger and older cohorts are conscripted. The temporary stabilization achieved at Kursk delays but does not avert the Reich's eventual defeat. However, the war's final year unfolds under different psychological conditions. The myth of German invincibility is not restored, but neither is it entirely extinguished in 1943. Instead of a steady, unstoppable Soviet surge beginning that summer, there is a prolonged duel in which initiative ebbs and flows before finally settling decisively against Germany. The Battle of Kursk, in this alternate chronicle, becomes not the graveyard of German offensive power but the crucible of a new defensive doctrine. It demonstrates that adaptability, even within a rigid political system, can yield temporary reprieve. It underscores the central truth of the Eastern Front, that victory or defeat hinged not solely on bravery or technology, but on the alignment of strategy with reality. By choosing defense in depth over precipitous assault, Germany buys time measured in months of continued resistance, in altered diplomatic calculations, in lives both spared and lost. History remains tragic. The fields of Russia still absorb the blood of millions. Cities are reduced to rubble. Families across Europe and beyond endure separation and grief. Yet the precise sequence of events, the rhythm of advance and retreat, the contours of post-war borders, all are subtly transformed by a single decision in the summer of 1943. The German army, instead of expending its strength in a doomed offensive, compels its adversary to pay dearly for every kilometer. In the end, the extended initiative cannot compensate for overwhelming material disparity and the encirclement of Germany by superior industrial powers. But for one additional year, the Eastern Front remains a contested arena rather than a one-directional tide. The outcome of the war is delayed, its costs redistributed, its political aftermath recalibrated, and at the center of that divergence stands Kursk, not as the moment Germany lost the initiative, But as the moment it briefly reclaimed the art of survival in a war it could not ultimately win.